There are times in your life when you have to be proactive. You don't wait for the prearranged moment. You decide that you move now that the time is right, and you move on it. I'm Kurt Fritz, and I was 28 when I suggested to my best friend of almost 2 decades that we should start going out together. I'm a contractor in Knoxville. I started out as a construction worker at 19, but I was fortunate enough to get license, and I've been building as much as I could because I knew this city had the potential to blow up. Katy Roan was 27, and she had been my best friend since we were 11. We went to high school together, both attended UT Knoxville, and we attended each other's graduations a year apart. But the story began when we were much younger. Real quick, I am telling this story with the help of the good people at We Are the Music Makers. They tell stories about life and love. Not about perfect people, but about people who learn, grow, and figure out how to love each other. If you like my story, I ask that you please like and subscribe to the channel. One day when I was 14 and she was 13, she came in with 2 obviously cheap rings that were probably bought at a dollar store. "Kurt," she said, "I think we should make a pact. Dad told me that people keep getting married older and older, and I don't want to be unmarried my whole life." She handed me one of the rings. "Let's make a deal that if you hit 30, we just get married." I looked at the ring, nodded, and agreed. What was I supposed to do? Hurt her feelings by telling her I never saw her as worth marrying? No way. I took the ring, slid it over my little finger, and held it up to her. "You swear?" she asked. I swore. She nodded and put the ring on her own finger. "We have to seal it with a kiss," she said. I thought she was making it up, but I still didn't argue. It was an awkward kiss, but it was our first 6 weeks ago. I was going through a wooden box on my nightstand. I kept my watches there. I had a bunch of foreign coins that I vaguely thought about mounting as a collection. There was a class ring, a fraternity pin, and a coin a veteran gave me for repairing a VFW haul on time and under budget. But in the back was a little generic yellow ring. At first I wondered where it came from. It was too small, but then I had a flashback of putting it on my pinky, and it all slowly came back. I put the ring in my wallet and thought about when I should bring it out for her. Fast forward to my 28th birthday. She had turned 27 a few weeks before. She was at my side at the party she was hosting at her place. She had bought the cake, and the gift she gave me was a fine wallet, made of calfskin leather. It was clearly well thought out, even as people were laughing and talking around us. I did something I never thought I would. I reached under the table and took her hand. She allowed it for a minute, and then let go. When I looked at her, her eyes were full of questions. Later on, when the party was over and everyone else had left, I was helping her clear the table and put stuff away. When we reached an obvious stopping point, I looked at her and said, "You're the best thing in my life." Her cheeks turned pink. "I felt the same about you for a while now," she admitted. "Let me ask you something. Do you remember the marriage pact we made when we were still kids?" She nodded, but didn't say anything. "I'm not saying you should feel bound to that. That's ridiculous, but how do you feel about it all these years later?" "That promise is legally binding," she protested. "No, it's not. It's emotionally binding. It was emotionally reckless of both of us." She picked up sponge from the sink and began wiping down the counter. "I think about it almost every day. I've thought about asking you it for a while now." That felt like evidence. That felt like something she was holding on to, not letting it go as something ridiculous. I pulled my old wallet out. The new one was still in the box. I pulled the little ring out from the pocket where I had placed it. Then I held it out to Katy. She stared at it blankly for 5 seconds, and then gasped. She took it, stared at it, and then ran back into her bedroom. A few minutes later, she came back and showed me 2 rings, mine and hers. "You kept it. I thought I was the only one." I nodded. I took the one she had given me so long ago and put it on my pinky finger. I couldn't get it past the second knuckle. She smiled and slid hers onto her pinky, and it fit. "Katy," I said quietly, "what went through your mind when I took your hand at the party?" Her face went red. Fully red this time. I was wishing I didn't have to wait another 3 years to do that. It was too nice. It was then that I decided, Katy Roan, we've known each other for more than 15 years. We've dated other people, we've remained best friends, and we've turned to each other when everything went either perfectly or terribly. I don't think we should wait any longer." Katy looked at me. Her eyes narrowed, first in suspicion, then in confusion. Then they softened into something like understanding. I could see the tiny flecks of yellow and red in her eyes as she looked at me for almost a minute. Then she slapped my shoulder, a gesture that I knew meant she knew she should be mad at me, but wasn't. "Kurt Fritz, what exactly are you saying?" she asked. I took her hand with the ring on it in mine, ring to ring. "I'm saying that even though I never intended to hold you to any promise from 15 years ago about marrying, I do think I love you, and I want to see what happens if we start seeing each other as more than friends." She smiled at that, and we agreed to go slowly. We both had a lot of hang-ups. We both had pasts. She had a boyfriend who had broken up with her 2 months ago, and I had an engagement that had ended less than a year ago. Being deliberate mattered. We weren't engaged. We weren't even announcing anything publicly yet, though I did make it clear I would be telling my parents. She agreed, but she wanted more time before she told hers. A week later, my mother invited me to dinner, and I asked to bring Katy along. There was a brief pause, but my mother agreed. When we arrived, we got out of the car and walked up the driveway, hand in hand. When my mother opened the door, she was polite, but not effusive. I had guessed as much. Dad was clearly less concerned, but he was being careful. He led us into the kitchen, where Mom was cooking. Iced tea was poured, and the conversation started out casual. "So," Dad began, "you're starting a relationship." He looked at me, then at Katy, then back at me. "Yes," I responded. "We've known each other for quite a long time, and we both want to see if we're compatible." Dad nodded. "Compatibility isn't just about chemistry, it's about shared values. Have you two talked about that?" "Dad, we've been talking about our values since we were kids," I remarked. Defensively, I could tell that Dad was picking his words carefully. He was hinting at something. Mom picked up from there. "Katy, you told me in private, when you were in college, that you didn't like children and that you never wanted to have them. Perhaps you have changed your views." That did catch me off guard. Admittedly, having kids was important to me. I grew up in a house with several older brothers and sisters, and I never doubted that I wanted a family of my own. I turned my eyes to her. Katy first chewed her food, then sat quietly for almost a minute, looking down at her tea, her eyes daring around the room. Finally, she glanced back at me. That was almost 10 years ago, and although I have not changed in a way that means children are a top priority to me, I would honor the desire of whoever my husband was to have children and raise them together. Dad nodded carefully. It was a concession, not an alignment. Mom was not as convinced. I spoke up. "We haven't made any long-term decisions. I'm going into this relationship with my eyes wide open." I looked at Dad. He nodded. Mom began putting food on plates, and we slowly migrated to the dining table, and I felt everyone was letting the issue drop for the time being. I looked at Katy and touched her elbow, just out of my parents' view. Then we began eating. My parents were polite and courteous to Katy. They probably knew that any more coldness would probably irritate me more than anything else. When the night was over, Dad allowed some warmth to shine through. He had always liked Katy, but his concern was real. Mom was no longer cool, but there was a line that she wasn't crossing. When we left, we were holding hands, but now there was a hint of doubt in my mind. I didn't want to let it change things, but now it was a lingering question when the last week had felt so easy. When we got into my car, there was silence. She was pressed up against the passenger door, not leaning towards me. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I just pulled out of the driveway and began driving. Katy must have sensed my consternation. "I am open," she said. "I said a lot of things a decade ago that I'm not proud of, and now I wish I hadn't." She sighed. "I've had to change a lot of my assumptions since leaving college. I'm not going to freeze your hopes out." That felt a little more hopeful, but what I couldn't afford was a set of promises that she was willing to make now, only to retract once we were in too deep. Neither of us felt clarity, and we'd have to live with that for now. What surprised me was a week later, when Katy informed me that an old boyfriend, Quentin, was visiting. He lived a couple of hours away, and he was doing some contract work in town. They had run into each other at a coffee shop. I'd like to meet him for coffee a couple times. He was charming, and I want to see if I still have feelings for him. After the concerns at my parents' house, I considered the possibility of this as an opportunity. It was still very early in our relationship. I was less sure than before, and maybe this was an easy out for both of us. If Katy realized there was something with this ex, I could step away and let the whole experiment fade without it being too messy. So I agreed. But I made rules. No getting physical, no going behind closed doors, and if she decided to go to him, she had let me know early. That was only fair. She agreed to my rules, and although we were still spending time together, I could tell she was making plans. Over next 2 or 3 days, there was this fog. I could tell she was still trying to maintain warmth, but couldn't hide her anticipation. On the third day, she texted me, letting me know she was meeting him. I spent the whole day fighting my own frustration and sense of injustice. Finally, when she came over that evening, I tried to act casual. At first, we didn't discuss it. We sat on my couch and talked about our work, some upcoming events, and even some reality TV show I knew nothing about, but the tension seemed to grow. Finally, I came out and asked, "So, how did the coffee date go?" Her eyes landed on me like I had ruined her life. But that didn't last. Then she started talk. Her voice was dry and looked down at her feet. "Oh, I showed up a couple minutes late. He was there. We talked about his job some. He's very proud of his work as a commercial inspector. We caught up on some old college friends, and that was it." She leaned back. It seemed like so little in the way of details. Was she hinting that she wasn't telling me everything? I decided to venture a second question, trying not to sound too needy. "What did you decide about a second date with him?" Her eyes looked up at me, like she wished I hadn't asked. "Oh, Quentin asked me if I'd like to go out for drinks tonight, but I told him that we should just see each other again on Thursday, like we agreed." Then she leaned her shoulder into mine. Something in me felt hopeful, but if she was still taking a second date, I felt like I should be steady. Maybe I should have been encouraged that she wasn't going out on a more romantic date with him, but I still felt more cautious than ever. I woke up Thursday to my phone buzzing. It was a text from Katy. She asked to come over before she met Quentin again. I wasn't going to tell her no, but all of this seemed so weird. When she arrived, she was dressed oddly quietly. Something about the blouse and denim skirt said she wasn't trying to impress. It said, "I'm a 10th grade English teacher, and that's really boring." I poured her coffee, and she seemed oddly quiet. I asked if there was anything on her mind, and she looked up at me. She opened her mouth a couple of times, then closed it again. "I've been talking to a couple of my married friends a bit more. I've been trying to get some perspective that maybe I hadn't had before." "Perspective," I repeated, unsure of what she meant. She looked at me as if I should be able to piece all this together myself. "Yes. They told me how happy they were working from home, spending time with their families. Lacey told me how, when her little boy Greg unrolled all the toilet paper onto the floor, she sent him to his room, but then spent the next 5 minutes laughing about it. It made me begin to think. Just then her phone buzzed. She looked at it. "Quentin," she said, in an oddly normal voice. "He's looking to confirm in an hour." She looked at me closely. And then there was the strangest question she ever asked. "Are you okay with all this?" That strange pause ate at me, and I don't know why. Why was she asking me? Why did she want to know if I was all right? I really wasn't, but I wanted to give her the chance to decide. "If you want to, then I'm okay." She took in a deep breath and exhaled, nodded, and looked down. "Okay, Kurt." We talked for a little longer. She stood up. I did too. I held my front door open for her, and she hesitated for a minute. Then she smiled, brushed her hand against mine, and left. When I sat down, I noticed something. There was a notebook on the floor. It was one of those small spiral notebooks people use for grocery lists. It was hanging open, and I couldn't help but glance at it. Lauren, Harold, Michael, Ellen, Jonathan. A list of some sort? Maybe she wouldn't want me looking at her personal notes, but I put it on the table where I knew she would find it. My day was quiet, since I didn't have any active projects. But it was only an hour later when my phone buzzed again. "Katy, need a favor. Come pick me up?" I looked out the window. The weather wasn't bad. She didn't tell me she had anywhere to be, but I felt like I owed this to her. I needed to be the supportive one, just in case. I drove over to the coffee shop and parked outside. A minute later, the door practically exploded open, and Katy walked straight over to the car and got in. She let out a breath that she must have been holding since she stood up. "Thanks so much for picking me up," she said directly afterwards, putting her hand on my shoulder. Then she jumped in her seat, pulled back quickly. We were both quiet for a minute. I could go for something to clear my mind. I thought for a minute. "Ride up to Brandywine Falls?" "Yes," she exclaimed. Then she got quiet. "If that's okay with you." That 2-hour trip to the falls felt like our first few days together, when everything still felt perfect. I wasn't holding my breath, because every moment felt like she was seeing me again. I wanted to say something, but while our bare feet were dangling into the water, I held my tongue. At one point, Katy mused, "We should go swimming here. That would be perfect." I agreed, and began to hope again. As we were driving back, she touched my arm. "I think I left my little notebook somewhere. Did I leave it in your apartment?" "Yeah, I have it on my table. Did you see anything?" she asked, as if she were nervous. "Yeah, just a bunch of random names, maybe people you know?" I asked. She laughed, but it sounded a little forced. I didn't press. She said she was glad I had it. But then I noticed an odd smile, almost like she knew something I didn't. I dropped her off near her apartment. "Thanks for picking me up, Kurt. I had a great time." Then she went in before I could say anything. I went to visit with my parents that evening for dinner. Dad was grilling burgers. Mom made a pie. I liked spending time with them. It was one of those times where there was no reason for a big gathering, and that made it all the more special. While we were eating, Mom spoke up. "I was talking with Lacey at the salon yesterday. She told me she saw Katy there. They were having a conversation about relationships." "That's nice," I said. "Yes," she remarked. "Is there any trouble we should know about?" I gaped at her. "Trouble? Mom, I don't understand." Her shoulders dropped an inch. She nodded. "Oh, nothing. Lacey was just saying she and Katy were talking about baby names and she was putting them in a notebook." She put a finger to her lips. "That doesn't sound like Katy from college. Baby names? Notebook?" I stopped. Suddenly, several seemed to fall into place. The notebook wasn't just a random list, and Katy wasn't just chatting with her friend. She was trying to find out what motherhood was like. Those names were for the children she might want. I looked at my mother. No trouble. "We haven't even done anything like that." She nodded, and I could. She was relieved. Not just because there was no trouble, but also because Katy was thinking about our future. Mom let out a more relaxed sigh, pulled out the pie and said, "Next time, bring her to dinner again." 2 days later, there was a text in the early evening. Katy, of course. "Meet me at the Pluto Diner in an hour. Miss you." 55 minutes later, I pulled those up, and Katy was sitting on a bench outside. When I got out, she walked up and took my arm. "I'm so glad you came," she said. Then she pulled me inside. We were headed to the back of the diner, where we usually sat, when I heard Katy say, "Oh, Quentin, fancy seeing you here. I was just going to have an evening with Kurt, my." She didn't finish that sentence. I wanted her to, but I was beginning to realize that she was engineering something. This felt like an end of sorts, but I wasn't sure what kind. "Kurt, shall we sit with Quentin for a minute?" She pulled me into the booth next to her. Then she turned to Quentin. "You know, Quentin, I had been visiting with Kurt's parents, and they made a point to talk about how much they wanted grandkids." I looked at her, confused. That's not how the conversation had gone. But I didn't get a chance to think about that because Quentin spoke up. "Huh. Grandkids, eh? Well, if it were my parents, I'd tell them to keep hoping because I ain't having any. I barely have enough time for a woman, much less a bunch of brats running around under my feet. My step-siblings were nothing but a bunch of trouble, and I'm never going back to anything like that again." I couldn't believe he'd say anything like that. I stared at him, thinking of something I could say. But before I could think of that showed my contempt without making a scene, Katy took hold of my arm, looked at Quentin with an air of distaste, and said, "Well, Quentin, I think Kurt and I are of a different opinion. I think we'll get a table of our own now. It was good seeing you again, Quentin. Thank you for the coffee. I hope you have a safe trip home." Before he could react, Katy leaned over and whispered, "Let's get another table." I stood up, offered her my hand, and then we found a booth at the back and sat down together, next to each other. At this point, almost everything was clear. Katy had set this whole scene up. How long? I asked. Her cheeks turned pink. Since the first coffee date, she murmured, Quentin isn't any more interesting than he was when I dated him in college. And the notebook. That wasn't just a random list. The pink didn't fade. No, I had talked to some of my married friends, and all of them were so happy with being mothers. She leaned into me. I can see it now. Can I tell you something insane? I saw her nod. Mom heard about the list of names, and she thought we were in trouble. She let out a little gasp.
We never. I know, I told her. Katy laughed a little. I was hoping you'd figure it out. If it took freaking your mom out a little, I guess that's one way of handling it. I put an arm over her shoulder. Mom said I should bring you around next time she invites me to dinner. Katy looked up and smiled. Good. It hurt when she didn't accept me. I know, I responded. You enjoyed engineering this little scene, didn't you? She smiled, but then squeezed my arm. Not entirely. I did give you the chance to pull me out of it before seeing him again. I asked if you were okay with all of this, and if you had said no, I would canceled it. This time my cheeks probably turned red. I didn't realize. She looked at me. I tried. I didn't want to spell it out, but I tried. The waitress came by with menus. We had been to Pluto's enough times that we didn't need to wait. When we placed our orders, Katy laid her head on my shoulder. This is real now, isn't it? Yes, I responded softly. Good. I thought I was going to have to wait another 3 years. She pulled out her little ring, one of the two she had bought so long ago. I pulled out mine. We're stuck now, aren't we? Now and forever, I added. She looked up at me, raising her lips to mine. I met them with my own, and that's when the little romance with the rings turned into something real.